if you really look at my country at the moment, you can see that in many ways it's being militarized by the United States. And the question is why it is doing it. And it's really something that Filipinos gets anxious about, because if you can see, I mean, there is really like a geopolitical rivalry between the United States and China. And it seems like we Filipinos, or the Philippines, is becoming like the proxy or the pawn of the United States against China in this sense. And you can see it because of the increasing militarization of the country by the United States. There's so many agreements that is now all about defense and military, and that is now being pushed through by the United States. And of course, the Philippine government under President Marcos Jr. is very much willing. They just signed, they just agree with everything.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the new episode. Today, I have the pleasure of hosting Professor Ana Rosario Malingdog-Uy. Ana is a director and vice president for external affairs of the Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute, a think tank based in Manila. She also serves as the geopolitical analyst and a senior researcher of the South China Sea Probing Initiative and a senior research fellow of the Global Governance Institution. Ana is a very prolific writer. I enjoy her articles very much. She's an academic and previously worked as a consultant with the Asian Development Bank. Ana, welcome. I'm so excited to meet you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Lena, for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to have a conversation with you, especially on issues that is critical to my country and even to the region, the Asia Pacific region, and the broader, in a broader sense, to the world. And this is really a good opportunity, and I'm looking forward to more exchanges with you, and after this one.
No, it is my pleasure. And I certainly appreciate your articles. I'm a big fan of yours. And like we just chatted, I have no idea when you sleep because your articles are so on point. They're so timely and so very important. And for our viewers, I will link Anna's blog, her website in the video description below. And if you would like to stay up to date on the recent developments, please give her a follow. So as all eyes are on the Middle East, of course, right now, there are very important events that are taking place in Southeast Asia, and they should not be dismissed. Of course, these events are in the context of the US-China and the US-Russia escalating tensions. The Philippines, due to its strategic location in the Indo-Pacific region, of course, found themselves in the epicenter of the recent developments. Anyone who's following the news is likely wondering, is the Philippines becoming a geopolitical proxy? Why is the United States deploying missiles to the Philippines and, along with the weapons, providing millions in military aid? Anna and I will discuss these and other very important questions today. Anna, could you start us off by walking us through the current developments between the United States and the Philippines? I know that U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin just visited Manila after visiting Tokyo, which is, of course, a very important step because NATO recently announced that it is opening an office in Japan. So we're definitely seeing the focus shifting towards military alliances in Asia. My understanding is that Blinken's visit to Manila was a very unusual one. What do you make of it?
Okay, just to give you a little background in terms of the Philippine United States relationship when you talk about defense and military, because this is the context of our discussion at the moment. If you really look at the Philippines is the longest military outpost and defense outpost of the United States in the Asia Pacific region. That's precisely because our history with the United States, you can trace it back during the colonization time. We were a colony of the United States for the longest time. And I think we just got our independence. They give us, not, it's really crazy because I don't even really recognize that as independence, because even until this very day, I feel that my country is still a colony of the United States, but we got it around July of 1946. So if you really look at that, if you see the pillars of what you call defense and security relationship and alliance between the United States and the Philippines, it boils down to three things, three agreements. One is the Mutual Defense Treaty of 1951, but it was ratified in 1952. And then you have the Visiting Forces Agreement. Well, the MDT basically is a document that says that, the Philippines is a military ally of the United States, and it's a non-NATO ally in the Asia-Pacific region. But the relationship is very close when you talk about military. And then the second very important agreement is the Visiting Forces Agreement between the Philippines and the United States, which basically this agreement allows the rotational and deployment of American troops on Philippine soil. And also it allows and it gives some kind of credence to what you call joint military exercises between the Philippines and the United States. And usually it happens in the Philippines now, and it becoming more aggressive, and it becomes huge in terms of number. And even usually the last April military exercises between these two countries has it deployed a huge number of soldiers from both sides, but more numbers on the side of the Americans. And also the critical point is, during the time the Americans deployed in the Philippines the mid-range missile launcher, which is until now it's in the Philippines in the northern part. So that's this kind of military activities, and also joint patrols in the South China Sea, which is disputed between China and the Philippines and other claimant states, is getting intensified. And the agreement that makes it possible is what you call the Visiting Forces Agreement. The other one, which is very contentious at this time, and this makes actually China anxious, and even in a way Russia to a greater extent, because of the mid-range deployment, a missile launcher that was deployed in the Philippines and it's still there, is the what you call Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. It's called Edka. Edka provides provide the leeway for the Americans to actually create or install what you call military bases, American military bases in Philippine military bases, or they call it site, but it's actually bases. But they kind of circumvented that, because constitutionally should not be allowed, and circumvented that in a sense that these are non-permanent. And the thing about the EDCA is, before it's only 5, okay, because it was signed in 2014, and now there's additional 4, and many of these EDCA bases are facing Taiwan or near Taiwan, and we know that Taiwan is a volatile area in the Asia Pacific region, and many also are facing or near the South China Sea, which is disputed, and you have China again in there, and in Taiwan Strait you have vis-a-vis China. So this additional EDCA bases, military bases of the Americans, is critical in a sense that it's not just putting an installation, but even then the most important here is prepositioning of military assets on Philippine soil. So this is now the development in the Philippines when you talk about Philippine United States relationship in defense, security, and military. But recently, there is an additional agreement that was signed between the Philippines and the United States because of the 2+2 ministerial dialogue. This started in 2012, and I think usually it happens in the United States, but first time that it happened in Manila. And they signed an agreement on intelligence exchange of information. And another outcome of this ministerial dialogue between the two countries is the $500 million US dollars kind of military financing that the United States is saying that it would extend to the Philippines. So if you really look at my country at the moment, you can see that in many ways it's being militarized by the United States. And the question is why it is doing it. And it's really something that Filipinos gets anxious about, because if you can see, I mean, there is really like a geopolitical rivalry between the United States and China. And it seems like we Filipinos, or the Philippines, is becoming like the proxy or the pawn of the United States against China in this sense. And you can see it because of the increasing militarization of the country by the United States. There's so many agreements that is now all about defense and military, and that is now being pushed through by the United States. And of course, the Philippine government under President Marcos Jr. is very much willing. They just signed, they just agree with everything. And another even agreement that has something to do with military and defense is what you call RAA, which is the reciprocal. We call it the reciprocal access agreement between Japan and Japan and the Philippines. But if you really look at it, it's actually orchestrated by the United States. So if this agreement is already approved and signed, no? So if you really look at it, there's such a thing as trilateral relationship between Japan, the Philippines, and the United States. And these are all military, and these are all defense agreements. So that is the picture of the Philippines at the moment. And this is not good the way I see it, precisely because the Asia-Pacific region, the Indo-Pacific region, and even the Asean region is now facing a lot of tension, geopolitically speaking, because of the external interference of the United States in the region. And all of this is, all about military and defense. So the Philippines is in the middle. I think the Philippines is now like the battleground of all of this geopolitical tension in Southeast Asia, and that is actually between China and the United States. So that's the picture that I can tell you about my country's situation, geopolitically speaking, because my country is very, very strategic in the Asia Pacific region when you talk about military and defense. It's actually part of what you call the first island chain, and we can discuss that later. Yeah.
That's very, very interesting. And I can guarantee you that the majority of people here in the United States have no idea that the US government just deployed mid-range missiles to the Philippines, and that they pledged to provide $500 million to support effectively an offensive military buildup in the region. In your recent article, I noticed that you discussed the offensive versus defensive nature of this buildup of the military power in the South Pacific Asia. And you, of course, pointed out that hosting a foreign advanced military asset is a big deal. It cannot be taken lightly. And as you pointed out, it actually violates the Constitution of the Philippines. So I would think that one may argue that the country is indeed making itself an easy target in a game played by main actors in the region. Do China and Russia view these new mid-range missiles as a clear provocation?
Yes, I think so. But before I go on to that, another thing that I think I would add to the discussion on the 2x2, 2+2 ministerial dialogue that happened last Tuesday of last week, of this week, actually, last Tuesday, is I think this ministerial meeting also, it's like unlikely that, Austin and Blinken will fly to Manila out of the blue. I think it's also the reason one reason that I can think of is there was an agreed provisional arrangement or agreement between China and the Philippines to de-escalate tension in the South China Sea, and to talk how to manage the dispute in the South China Sea, especially the resupply mission in the second Tama Shoal, which is very disputed, and it creates a lot of skirmishes before. So there was that provisional arrangement, and so far, last Saturday or Sunday of last week, the resupply mission of our troops to that area in the South China Sea was successful. So I think, I mean, the Americans probably are having this paranoia that probably the Philippine government is now having good relation with China, or trying, or the tension is now de-escalated. So I think they don't want that, because they want to hype things out in the South China Sea. So that's one thing that I can think of, out of the blue, why, the high-ranking official from the United States will just flew to Manila. But I think also the most important thing that people should understand is this 2+2 dialogue between the United States and the Philippines is more about strengthening the military and defense alliance between the two countries. They really want to have a hold on the Philippines. And when you talk about the mid-range missile launcher that was deployed in the country, it's basically in northern Luzon, and until now it's still there. They told the public, I mean, the military, the armed forces of the Philippines told the public in the Philippines, saying that the United States will withdraw that military asset, but it depends if the training is already done or successful to a certain extent. So there's no definite answer if they will if that deployed a mid-range missile asset will really be removed from my country. Not yet really definite in that sense. But when you talk about reaction coming from Russia and from China, I think Russia, it took President Putin actually to point out and told the Philippines that, we took note of this deployment coming from the United States. And it seems like Russia is also a little bit anxious why there's a deployment in the Philippines of this kind of military asset, when in fact it should not happen, because even Russia did not anymore manufacture this kind of military assets. There was somewhat an agreement that, you don't deploy this, because this is the first time, I think, that the United States deployed this military asset in the Asia Pacific region. So Russia is reacting, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was President Putin pointed it out in his meeting with his generals last June 28th or July 28th. It happened because I took note of these things. So Russia is reacting and trying to give us a warning that, give the Philippines a warning, the Marcos administration a warning, saying like, we know what is going on in your country, and we know that there is that deployment of this mid-range missile in the Philippines. And also China recently, just last week, this past week, already expressed that they are not in agreement with this, that they oppose this, and it makes them anxious. And probably because of this deployment, other countries in the region it will provoke an arms race in the Asia Pacific region, or even in Southeast Asia. This is precisely because deployment of mid-range missile is not a defensive posture as far as my country is concerned. It's actually an offensive posture in a sense, because you're sending a signal to other countries in the region that, we have this military capability. And if you talk about the South China Sea, and we want to defend our claim in there, anytime we can retaliate, or we have forces to defend our claim. On the other hand, other countries in the region would think, okay, the Philippines is being armed. We also need to arm ourselves and increase our military spending and accumulate certain military armaments for us also to counter whatever the Philippines has when it comes to military strength. Because of course it becomes like a tug of war. So this is not anymore defensive. It creates a lot of tension in the region, and definitely it will provoke an arms race. So that's why I don't see it as defensive posture. I see it as offensive posturing. And we have already concrete example of this during the Cold War. And you see the Cuban Missile Crisis during the Cold War. It was not really defensive. The deployment, if it was pushed through, then it's really offensive. It's a defensive, but more of an offensive posturing when you talk about military. And it creates some kind of a Cold War atmosphere in the Asia Pacific region. If this kind of deployment of high level military assets continue, may it be in my country or in any other country, being done by the United States. So I really don't agree with it. And I really hope that this mid-range missile launcher will be removed from my country in September. But that is not even definite at the moment. If it really it will really happen, I'm not really sure. But of course, we hope so, because now countries like China and Russia, they're reacting to it, and they're giving us some kind of warning that, we know what you're doing in your country, and we know the Americans are deploying some high-level military assets in the Philippines. So don't ever think that we don't know, something to that effect. So I don't think this is good for my country at all. We're like in a situation that anytime we're like a bomb. We're a ticking bomb that anytime soon it will erupt. And the problem is the Edka bases, which is our American military bases. If in any case there's a military conflict that would break out in the Taiwan Strait or even in the South China Sea, we will be the subject of retaliation coming from American adversaries because we have the military bases. So that is not good for my country. We will never. It's not part of our national interest to have these Edka bases and even to be like a pawn or a proxy of the United States. Our national interest as a country, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as a Filipino, is first and foremost is the preservation of our sovereignty and independence. And this sovereignty and independence is now compromised because of the presence of the Americans in my country, because of this additional Edka bases or the Edka bases that are now being used to militarize the Philippines, and our independence is also compromised. The second national interest of our country is what? Economic development and prosperity. But because of this some kind of atmosphere that we are the next Ukraine in Asia, or we're being prepared to be the next Ukraine of Asia by the United States, our economy is suffering because no serious investor would invest in the country. If your country would in any way, there's a looming perception in the horizon that you will be involved in a major conflict in Asia Pacific region. So that is also compromised, the national interest of really pursuing economic development and prosperity, and also our autonomy as a country. It seems like we're not a sovereign state at this time. We're like a semi-colonial state of the United States under Marcos government. So this is really like we're going back to the history of in during colonization time. We're like backtracking when in fact we should be moving forward as an independent sovereign nation state. But the Americans are here. The Americans are very much heavily influencing our foreign policy. Their presence is very much felt in the country. Military assets of the Americans are in the country. So this makes everything. Our country is compromised in every possible way. And I think the bottom line here is we're really, at the moment, being transformed into a proxy of the United States vis-a-vis China in the Asia Pacific region, in the same manner that Ukraine is the proxy of the United States in the Ukraine crisis vis-a-vis Russia. So that's how it is. That's how the situation here at the moment, in the Philippines at the moment.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think this is a type of preparation. And if anything, you would think that the Philippines would have already learned that proxies are disposable and nobody counts the death toll of a proxy's army, right? Which, of course, is a tragic, very, very tragic reality in the Ukraine crisis, in the Ukraine war, with so many, over I think 500,000 men being dead as the result of failed attempts on Russia's part to negotiate a peaceful outcome. And you would think that the Philippines would at least learn a little bit from that scenario and understand that more of a neutral stance would definitely benefit its economy, because they would be able to take advantage of their position, their geographical location in the Indo-Pacific, to trade with Russia, to trade with China, and maintain beneficial ties with the United States versus becoming effectively a proxy battleground, a potential proxy battleground in the worst case scenario. How likely do you think it is that the deployment of these advanced missiles would actually prompt China and Russia to potentially place their weapons in the region, targeting the Philippines?
I'm not well, if you listen to President Putin, I mean, from what he said, like they're already thinking that probably they should adjust their military placement of their military assets. And of course, and I would understand for the protection and security of the Russian Federation, probably President Putin will probably deploy military capability in probably North Korea, who is a friend of Russia, and even some parts of and I think there's a territory somewhere in the Pacific near Japan that controlled by the under Russian Federation control, that they can actually deploy capability in there, military capability in there. Of course, it's but normal for Russia and China to do something, because they can see already that the Philippines are, there are a lot of high level military assets in the country, like that, the Americans, well, it's under the control of the Americans, not of the Filipinos. So you can see it. So the possibility really for Russia and China to make a move as well is there. But the thing here is like this, no? As much as possible, of course, we don't want that to happen. I mean, I just hope that the Chinese and the Russians will understand that the Filipinos in general, like, the Filipino doesn't want the Philippines to be the proxy, and doesn't want we don't want the Philippines to be in the middle of this all geopolitical tension between major powers or military superpowers in the region, and that would include the United States, Russia, and China. These are really great powers when you talk about military and defense. So as much as possible, we Filipinos, we don't want that. But you have to understand that we have a current government that is very subservient and very a foreign policy that's very beholden to the United States, that makes all of this possible. So that is the case. And you need also to people need to understand that if you look at the Philippines, it's part of what you call the first island chain. The first island chain. And what are the countries that belongs to that first island chain? It's the perimeter, the defense perimeter, or capability, deployed capability of the United States. Of course, you have Japan, then you have Taiwan, and you have the Philippines, and then you have the United States because of Guam. So you can understand why the United States is militarizing us. Because if in any case there would be a military outbreak, even between China and the United States, definitely this the first island chain, will the first either defensive or offensive capability, militarily speaking, of the United States, and we're part of it. Before, during Duterte's time, we're not part of it. But now under Marcos Jr., if you see the war games that's going on and being undertaken by some think tanks, defense think tank, the Philippines is already part of this. So that's the scenario right now. But in terms of perception, if in any case China will, of course, probably prepare for something, for any eventuality against us or against the United States, well, I would understand that, and even Russia for that matter, because it's very understandable. That's why what I'm saying is deployment of high level military assets in countries like the Philippines, especially when you talk about mid-range missile or what kind of nuclear weapons or anything for that matter, is not at all good, because that will provoke other countries, especially major powers, to also do something to protect themselves, to protect their country, as vis-a-vis a country like the Philippines is being equipped by the United States, because that is really the case. No country, for that matter, will just sit down and clap their hands and say, "Ah, the Philippines has a lot of military assets from the United States. Oh, that's good." Of course not. They will do something also to protect themselves and to prepare for any eventuality, and that makes things dangerous and alarming for the Asia Pacific region, because as much as possible, as part of Asia, as an Asian person, I don't want Asia to experience what is going on right now in the Middle East and even in the European side. I don't want that to happen in Asia Pacific. I don't think we need to add something to the already chaotic world that we have at the moment. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think it's good. You have a lot of crises at the moment in this world. You have the Gaza conflict, Israel, backed up by the United States, in the Middle East that's very conflicting. You have still the Ukraine crisis. Now, do you want to add one more in Asia Pacific out of the Philippines? Of course not. That is crazy, to be very frank. So that is why it's very important for people to understand what is going on in the Philippines and how it impacts the stability, the peace, and security of the whole Asia Pacific region. And it's very important to identify the country that is facilitating this kind of tension. And at the end of the day, it is the United States, really. It's a common denominator, for God's sake. In Ukraine, it is. Of course, with the backing of NATO. In Gaza, with Israel, the United States is backing Israel. With that kind of genocide, they're still backing, as against what? Other countries in the Middle East who are supporting the Palestinians. So if you really look at this, there's only one denominator there. It's the United States. And I hope the Americans will tell their government, this is not good for countries like mine. So
Yeah.
I don't know what's going also in the I think American politics is also very conflicting at this time with the upcoming election in November. It's
Yeah,
also very
absolutely.
chaotic.
Oh, yes. I think there's a lot of instability here, and more people are actually starting to wake up and realize that this isn't right, and it's not going to lead. There's no good outcome after this. And I think you point out a very important aspect of the common denominator of the United States foreign policy, this interventionist worldview being the common denominator, because up until recently, it the wars were waged on foreign soil. So there was here people have no idea what the war looks like, and I think that there's a very good book that I read recently, and it is written by Norman Solomon. I spoke to him several months ago, and he makes such a wonderful observation. He says the Americans view war as a movie, right? Because it's shown to them through the screens. But in reality, if they knew what it does to the people in those war zones, in those conflict zones, they would have spoken up. They would have opposed, because no sane person would support wars, waging endless wars just for the sake of waging them. So I really appreciate you pointing out the common denominator and the role that the U.S. population can assume in bringing peace to the forefront of the discussion, and to hopefully bring in an end to all of this madness that is going on. And as you point out, we have the war in Europe. There is of course the Gaza situation, and there are escalating tensions in the Middle East, with Senator Lindsey Graham just effectively introducing a bill on July the 31st to allow the deployment of U.S. forces in the Middle East. So it's definitely ramping up, and I think it is very, very important. This is why this discussion is important, and I was looking forward to speak to you to bring these details to the attention of the American public and anyone else who's willing to watch, to allow them to understand what they're not being told by the mainstream media, and then to make their own conclusions as to why they're not given this very, very important information that will impact them as well. This is, given the weapons that we have now, and as you described, the deployment of advanced missiles in the Indo-Pacific region, this is not something that will should go unnoticed. This needs to be at the forefront and discussed. How does the deployment of the missiles and $500 million in military aid from the United States, how do those things impact the standing of the Philippines in the ASEAN alliance?
If you really look at how we are being viewed by our ASEAN counterparts, and that would mean countries in Southeast Asia, and there's 10 member countries of ASEAN, but you have East Timor also, the number 11 Southeast Asian country, but not yet officially member of ASEAN. That is also really like, on my side, I feel sad about this, because our counterparts in the ASEAN region, and I also have some kind of discussion with many of them. They're not really necessarily from the governments, no, they're not government officials, but they're very much involved in different issues, especially that has something to do with geopolitical issues. When I talk to my colleagues in different countries of Southeast Asia, the first thing that they ask me is, why is it that you change your foreign policy from an independent and neutral and balanced to a leaning to the United States foreign policy? And I said, oh, that is a very good question. Sometimes, you just don't know what to say. And then some of my colleagues will ask me, it seems, and will tell me, it seems that the Philippines is now the candidate or a potential Ukraine of Asia. That is the perception, really, coming from so many colleagues from different countries in ASEAN. And even then, if you really look at if you listen to the pronouncement of some ASEAN leaders, you can see that it seems like the United States is getting isolated and separated from its ASEAN neighbors and ASEAN brothers in that sense, because many leaders would say that, like, for example, the Malaysian prime minister would say, like, the United States should not dictate us of how we're going to behave and how we're going to do our foreign policy. If they have problem with China, they resolve it with China. It's not necessarily directed to us in a sense that pointing to the Philippines, oh, you Philippines are, your foreign policy is not independent. But if you really listen to some ASEAN leaders, it actually tries to tell the Philippines that, Philippines, among ASEAN countries, you're the only one who is beholden to the United States. All of us has an independent foreign policy, and we are neutral and balanced. We deal with China, we deal with the United States, we deal with Russia equally. We don't side with one. But it seems that you, on the other hand, the Philippines, you are on the side of the United States, which is not necessarily an ASEAN value or an ASEAN character. Because ASEAN as an international body, one of the tenets of ASEAN as an intergovernmental body is neutrality. Neutrality is one. And also that one of the important agreement of ASEAN as an international intergovernmental body is that the Southeast Asian region should be free from any kind of nuclear weapon. It should be a zone of peace and a zone free from nuclear weapon, and neutrality is the name of the game. Now, if you have that kind of values emanating from ASEAN, and we are part of ASEAN, we're actually one of the founding members of ASEAN, and given our position right now under Marcos Jr., it seems really that we're somewhat detached from ASEAN, and also ASEAN counterparts see us differently. That we're like a problem maker in Southeast Asia to a greater extent at this time. Really, that is the kind of feeling and the kind of perception I get from my colleagues in different countries of Southeast Asia. And sometimes it's hard to explain to them that, it's not the Filipino people who wants this kind of situation. It's really the government. It's just so happened, unfortunately, that we have a president who is too much beholden to the United States. And his foreign policy is really like, not neutral at all, leaning to the United States. And it seems like the United States has heavily influenced everything that's going on under Marcos' government. But the Filipino people, no, I don't think so. I think we always wanted to be an independent, sovereign state, that we have our own, we have our own voice, that we know what is the direction of the country. But at the end of the day, it's very difficult because if you look at our constitution, the 1987 constitution, it says there that the sole author or architect of our foreign policy is the president. That is really um sad that it's in our constitution. So it's really the president who has the power and who has the leeway and the upper hand when you talk about foreign policy in the country. And it just so happened that our foreign policy under Marcos Jr. is really US leading. It's beholden to the United States. It's a militarized foreign policy, and everything revolves around China. It's all about, because everything is all about containment. I mean, if you really need to understand that, the reason why the Americans are making a proxy or a pawn out of the Philippines vis-a-vis China, it has something to do with the containment and countering China in the Asia Pacific region in terms of China's growing influence. So it seems that the Philippines under Marcos Jr. is a willing pawn to that policy of the United States. They want to contain China. They want to contain the rise of China. They want to contain the growing influence of China. They cannot fight China directly, the United States. They need a pawn. And under President Marcos Jr., it seems that the Philippines is a pawn of the United States that will fulfill that kind of foreign policy of the United States. That's the sad story. And everyone in Asia Pacific and even the ASEAN countries can see that clearly. So that is how we are being perceived by our Asian, brothers and sisters in the Asia Pacific at this time. Well, that is also the case under Marcos Jr., really. But I don't believe that Filipinos would want us to be perceived like that. I mean, Filipinos, not the government.
Mm-hmm.
I always make a distinction between the people and the government, because the government may have this kind of policy, but the people may disagree with that. It just so happened that they are in government. The people in government are powerful and they do something. They have the power, but the people does not agree. We don't agree. That's why if you look at the Philippines right now, there's really a lot of political struggle between the political opposition not agreeing with Marcos Jr. One of that is the foreign policy, and Marcos Jr. pushing that kind of foreign policy of the country. So you can see the struggle also domestically speaking in the Philippines. One of the point of struggle is this issue that we're talking about right now.
And it's interesting because the scenario is very similar to that of Ukraine in 2014, when the majority of Ukrainians actually had no idea what NATO was, but they certainly didn't want a war with Russia in order to explore an opportunity, which was a very distant opportunity of becoming member of NATO or the EU. And yet the government that was installed in 2014 effectively took Ukraine that path, and we know what happened after that. And so the Philippines scenario seems to be very, very similar, where, as you mentioned, people are not supporting these policies. They do not want foreign military assets on their soil, and yet we see that it is happening, and it's only escalating, of course, with the recent visits from State Secretary and Defense Lloyd Austin. So it really does seem that it's going that route, unfortunately. Hopefully that's not the case, but I'm certainly seeing those similarities, and they're
Yes.
very, very alarming. When you mentioned economic development, and recently Malaysia applied to join the BRICS bloc. The BRICS bloc is a very, very promising route for emerging economies. Malaysia certainly sees it that way. Do you think that the Philippines may be interested, or my take is that it is unlikely given their foreign policy and the relations with the United States? But what do you see? How do you see the developments with the BRICS bloc and the Philippines in the near future?
Under Marcos Jr. administration, I don't think so. I don't think we will be pushing or we will be applying for membership with be part of BRICS. I don't think that will happen unless I'm wrong, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'll be proven wrong, but I don't see it really. But I'm not sure in the future though, because the problem at the moment is we don't know if Marcos' leadership will be extended beyond his term, because in locally in domestic politics there is also a problem of that. There is a perception that they want to stay in power more than the time allotted for him to stay as president. So that is also another struggle and another domestic issue that people like me, we don't agree. So if you ask me if in the near future there's a possibility for us to join BRICS, I think it's hard to tell unless there's a change of leadership. But if there's a change of leadership, and a new leader will emerge in a sense that understand the importance of BRICS, because you have already like Indonesia, you have Malaysia, you have Thailand even applying for membership. I mean, as a country, I think we should apply. But at the moment, given the heavy influence of the United States, and they look at BRICS as a China orchestrated thing and Russia orchestrated thing, because Russia and China are very strong in BRICS. Though they're not the only members of BRICS, but these two countries are very prominent in BRICS. So I don't think with the United States influence and of my country that we will be joining BRICS anytime soon. But I think if there's a change of leadership, and the one who will lead the country is more geared towards economic development and prosperity, would prioritize this sector rather than defense, then the possibility for us joining BRICS and joining more economic groupings, would be there. But at this time, I don't see it really. I really don't see it. And another thing that I forgot to mention earlier, Lena, is about about the possibility of that the Philippines will be the spark plug, the launcher of any kind of military conflict in the Asia Pacific region. One thing that people has to understand, if in any case a military outbreak will happen in the Asia Pacific region, may it be in the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait, I would want to emphasize that this is not just the problem of the Philippines. The Philippines may be the pawn, but the impact of this will affect all countries in the region and also beyond the region. Because if you really look at the situation at the moment, the players involved are superpowers. You have China and you have the United States, and of course the allies of China will get involved, the allies of the United States will get involved, and you have the G7. And of course, Russia being a friend of China, I don't think Russia will just sit down. Okay, so this is very important. The issue of the Philippines vis-a-vis the geopolitical tension in the Indo-Pacific region is critical, because if in any case something happened in there and a military outbreak would come out, this is not just a regional conflict. It will be global in a sense. So that's why people like us, we need to let people understand that, the Philippines may be a small country, but it's a very strategic country, and right now it's being capitalized by the United States against its perceived adversary like China and Russia in some ways, but it's more China because it's Asia Pacific. So that is something that I forgot to explain earlier, and now I'm trying to explain after I explain about the BRICS. That I'm not going back to BRICS. Really, it's unfortunate, but personally, I want us to be part of BRICS. I want us to be part of the Belt and Road Initiative. We're not part of it. We withdraw. I think we pulled out from the BRI. And I don't understand why. BRI is very important. There's a lot of countries who are part of the BRI, not only Asia Pacific, but even European side, even Latin America, Africa. But we are not even part of it. We lose the opportunity. Thailand, Indonesia are benefiting from BRI. Why is it that we let go of these things? At the end of the day, it's all about American influence. America said that they are the savior of my country, that they can fill in any kind of losses on the part of China when you talk about investment. But look at American economy. Look at the debts of America. It's how much? 35 trillion dollars
35,
already.
35. Yes, I think it just hit
35,
35
and
a
then
couple of.
and right,
Mhm.
35 trillion, and then they are saying that, don't worry, the Philippines, we are here and we will be the one supporting you with your economics and all that, and the defense. I don't think so. All of these are pledges. Even the funny part of it, because the 500 million US dollars is not yet happening. It's a pledge, and I think it's being deliberated in the US Congress. But they already said that they will extend. It seems like we're being fooled by the Americans in many ways, and of course it's being used by the current government to tell Filipinos that, the Americans are our best friends, they will help us, they are there for us. But in terms of concrete benefits and concrete really things, it's not happening. And even if it happens, take note, they will supply us with second-hand weapons, and then we have to pay for that, because this is not grant, these are, I think, loan, and we will
Right.
still be paying for it. And even the Edka bases, the military American bases in the Philippines, they don't pay rent. They're using our land, but they don't pay rent. Maybe the American people must be aware of these things. You cannot exploit the Philippines forever. You've been exploiting us for what? Hundreds of years? And you're still exploiting us in the 21st century? My God, that's too much. Really too much.
Absolutely. And it's so important that you point out those things, because I don't think anybody here in the United States or in anywhere in the world really understands these details and how this works, how the rent is obviously negotiated to be completely absent, right? So the benefits of going down this path for the Philippines and for any country that is sort of in that line of thinking where a proxy is a good idea, they really need to stop and think about obviously the tragic circumstances in Ukraine and what transpired there, the broader impact that the war in Ukraine had on European economies, the decoupling from Russian natural resources, and the economic downfall of the EU, effectively, with so many economies contracting. And of course, the Asia Pacific seems to be the next chapter in this permanent uh, playbook of warmongering and using smaller, weaker countries as proxies in the geopolitical game. And maybe to finish the discussion, you mentioned the economic impact that the war would have on countries in the region and beyond, and not just the war, but the military buildup and the fact that foreign investment is not going to the Philippines now, because they understand that there's a possibility of the Philippines being involved, and nobody wants to invest in a high risk business, right? So how does the military buildup in the region, and specifically in the Philippines, how do you think that may impact the economy of the region and beyond?
I think when you talk about military buildup and how it impacts the economy in many ways, is first and foremost, like especially the Philippines, no, when investor, I mean, it impacts in a sense that it prevents a serious investor to come to invest in the Philippines, precisely because when you look at the Philippines at the moment, with all of this military buildup, militarization by the United States, it always have that kind, I mean, investor would have that perception that it's not good to invest in a country that anytime soon will be used as a proxy in a military war, in a military conflict between China and the United States. So in that sense, foreign direct investment is somewhat a problem for the Philippines. The last statistics that I know is like 65, the first quarter of 2024, a decline of more than 65% of investment happened in the country. So it means like there's a decline of 65, more than 65% decline in terms of investment, foreign investment in the country. And in terms of index, if we're attractive to serious foreign investors, I think we also went down from 12 or 13 to 12, something to that effect. No, it was in one of the um, surveys that was conducted by an international entity. So that is one reason why. the question is how this impacts the local economy. It impacts the local economy precisely because if you don't have new foreign investors in the country, it means you don't have new what you call activities, economic activities
Mhm.
in the Philippines. So if you don't have new economic activities, you don't have new capital investment in the country, then if you really look at the Philippines right now, it has a lot of economic problem. Inflation is high, wages is low, inflation of basic commodities, and we talk about electricity, transportation, communication, basic commodities like staple food, like rice. The price of rice is too high. The price of even onion is way too high. So these are things, and that is going on. And then there's not much economic activity because you don't have much foreign direct investment in the country, and then you have low wages or the wages are static. So if you have high inflation and the wages is just here or going down, it means the standard of living of the Filipinos is going down, and then poverty index going up. So that's really the impact in the country. And the question is, why is it that there's, I mean, no serious foreign investor would want to invest in the Philippines. And even the Chinese investors are not anymore doing it. They're not anymore coming into the country. It's precisely first and foremost, you have the tension in the South China Sea between China and the Philippines. The biggest one of our, I think, um, in terms of ranking, China, I think, is number three before in terms of investment in the country. Now, I don't think the Chinese are encouraged to do that because you have a very volatile and deteriorating political and diplomatic relationship between the two countries. Now, other investors from other countries, except the United States, because they are saying that they will invest, but these are all pledges, are not also interested in the country. It's precisely because of that seemingly looming horizon that we are like the next Ukraine of Asia, and that discourages them from investing in the country. And even right, and there was even a news right now that hot money, hot funds are coming out of the country, withdrawing the liquid, the portfolio hot money is being withdrawn outside of the country precisely because the investors are afraid that the Philippines is really volatile, both internationally speaking or regionally speaking and domestically speaking, because you have political instability also in the country. So this is the situation, and it affects the local economy. On the other hand, if you put it in a broader sense, like regional countries, I think when a country is militarized, like for example the Philippines by the United States, in terms of military assets, like deployment of high-level military assets like missiles or mid-range missiles for that matter, I think other countries would also militarize themselves. So it means like, there's an arms race. If you
Yeah.
have an arms race, money that is supposed to be going to social welfare, economic activity, and infrastructure development would be redirected to military spending. And some countries would do that. And it impacts economy of other countries too. Because, you have to have funds for you to militarize also your own military capability and to upgrade your military capability. And if you look at the Philippines having that kind of situation, of course, like me, if I'm in another country in Southeast Asia, I would say, okay, I also have to prepare. So I will have to increase my military spending. So the money that is supposed to be for other things would be redirected to military spending. And that impacts the local domestic situation and the local economy of other countries too. So that's really the situation. And that kind of situation may happen anytime soon. But in our side, Philippines, is already happening. It's really happening right now. There's a lot of economic problems in the country, like inflation, employment is another problem. Low employment, wages is not increasing, static, but inflation is too high, and we don't have much investors coming into the country. Infrastructure is not pushing, precisely you don't have money for that, or you don't have investor for that. So it domestically the country suffers too. But you can see the other side, like the military side, they have more money, pledges coming from the United States. and we don't need it. To be very frank, I don't think our country needs really this kind of military financing coming from the United States, because as far as I'm concerned, the Philippines, we don't have an enemy. We don't have an external enemy. China is not our enemy. Really, we don't. And I don't understand why we are being militarized in the first place. Because Philippines as itself, we don't have an enemy. Now, the question is, why is it that the United States militarizing us? It's for their own purposes and security and defense against their own adversary. And that American adversary is not Philippine adversary, or enemy of America is not our enemy, but we are being used. So the reason why we're being militarized is not because we have an enemy out of China or out of Russia. It's precisely because the United States is using us against their own perceived enemies. So that's the bottom line.
Absolutely. So the Philippines is willingly becoming a pawn in this game to its own detriment. Like you said, foreign direct investments bring capital to build infrastructure such as roads, hospitals, state-sponsored facilities that are essential. And that's what's not going to happen anymore, or will happen at a very, very low rate, if anything at all, like you mentioned. So the Marcos administration really should reconsider what's in the best interest of the Filipinos, and from the security standpoint, from national security standpoint, from sovereignty standpoint, as well as from just purely human security standpoint perspective, with the quality of life decreasing, perhaps lack of access to medical care, to education for the most vulnerable groups of the population. Those are the things to consider versus becoming a proxy and possibly taking a hit in the worst case scenario. Hopefully won't happen.
Hopefully so, because as there is a saying, there's a saying that to be an enemy of America can be very dangerous, but to be a friend of America or of the United States is fatal. And that saying, I think it's Henry Kissinger who said that, if I'm not mistaken. And it seems true to our context in the Philippines. The last visit of in the last 2+2 ministerial dialogue between the Philippines and the United States, Secretary Austin said of the United States, like, we're not just friends, we're family. He said that. And I said, and my own thinking is like this. Okay, we are not just friends, we're family, but how can you compromise your family member? And how can you create a pawn out of your family member and be like, a pawn that you put in the spotlight and to be the target of your adversary? Is that a way of taking care of a family member? I don't think so. And so that's really crazy. It's like, you're really like trying to fool the Filipinos, while listening to him. I was like, oh my God, you're fooling us. If you really treat us as a friend or a family, a member of your family, you don't put us in a compromising situation that will destroy our country. And you don't compromise our independence and sovereignty. You let us be. And you give us the space to determine our own path as a nation state. As a sovereign nation state, you don't intervene, you don't control us, but give us the support to flourish on our own. And you don't put us in a situation where we are being like perceived as an enemy of Russia or an enemy of China. Because as a country, we don't see it that way. As a people, we don't see it that way. But that was really telling for me, like, what? Really? You're saying that to us? And that was live in national TV. He was really speaking, and there was a coverage, and the coverage was live on national TV. I was like, wow, the audacity to even call us as a member, as a family, was really crazy. It's like, you don't do that to your family. You should not do that to us. You don't put us in the spotlight that everyone look at us as the next Ukraine of Asia. You don't do that. If America or the United States would really treat us as a family, then the first thing that they need to do is to respect our sovereignty as an independence, as a nation state. That is the basic thing that they can do. If they look at us as a friend, then they should not put us on the spotlight and transform us as a pawn or a proxy in their war games, or whatever kind of geopolitical rivalry between China, vis-a-vis China or other major powers in the region or in the world, because you don't do that to your friend. That is really the truth of the matter. So I was like, okay, fine, whatever. And it's like, that's my reaction. It's like, what, oh my god. Like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
I was listening to him. I was watching the coverage during their visit to Manila last Tuesday, and Blinken was there. President Marcos was there because President Marcos hosted them like a courtesy call. They were there. The ambassador of the United States to Manila, to the Philippines, was also there, and of course the government officials were there. It's like, so listening really carefully and attentively, watching the TV, like, huh, really?
Yeah,
So
it is it is truly shocking. And like you pointed out, the political leaders and the mainstream media trying to sell us this narrative that effectively war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. So the more and more you watch this and pay attention to this, I think the more Orwellian it becomes. So certainly, absolutely agree with you there. And thank you so much for the insights that you shared and for the conversation. I think this is very important. Here in the United States, a very small portion of the population, if that, is aware of these escalatory techniques and the deployment of missiles to the Philippines, along with sending millions in military aid. I know that people are slowly but surely becoming more sensitive to these issues and aware of just how much the warmongers in power do on a daily basis to escalate tensions worldwide. I would absolutely love to have you back on to discuss this further. I hope you come back. Thank you so much, Anna.
thank you so much, Lena, and thank you so much for the opportunity extended to me to discuss this very important issue.